The big ones were waterboarding, the cold cell, and sleep deprivation. And the Justice Department never said anything about that. They're like, oh, listen, you can do these techniques, and if you kill him, just bury him out back. Nah, that wasn't the approved operation.
Was any of it effective? Like, was there any actionable information?
That's the worst part of this. No, none of it was effective.
Joe Rogan and John Kiriakou just exposed the dark truth about CIA torture programs. Whether they were effective, what kind of torture was used in contravention of the U.S. Constitution by our criminal government, and what this means for American policy. Kiriakou is a former CIA official who is a whistleblower that blew the lid off CIA atrocities during the Bush and Cheney terms, so let's get his take on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
They worked with LSD for 20 years, at least. Yeah. At least 20 years. There was an operation, it was a sub-operation of MKUltra, where they rented a safe house in San Francisco. They recruited a bunch of hookers and had them go out and pick up Johns, bring them back to the safe house where they thought they were going to get laid, dose them with LSD, and then interrogate them and try to get them to give up their deepest secrets. It's like
Midnight Climax.
Yeah, Midnight Climax, exactly. Yeah. It's like, nobody's agreed to do this. You haven't informed them properly. These are American citizens. You can't just take people off the streets and force LSD down their throats.
Well, they were running the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic.
Yeah,
until right after, a month after Chaos by Tom O'Neill came out. Yeah,
you're exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah, my
craziness.
My wife's mom went there. She was a hippie in San Francisco.
Wow.
She went to the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic.
Oh,
it was run by the CIA, which is so crazy, and it's totally connected to Manson, the Manson.
Oh yeah,
family.
Manson. Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
Manson was a part of it as well.
It's so nuts, and they wouldn't have even known about that until they found a stash of documents that connected it all together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a lot of the MKUltra documents were shredded by the CIA. We know that after the Church Committee, that's what happened. And this was their excuse to conduct torture on Americans, that, we just need this information so bad that we can just subvert due process. And then several decades later, they're saying, well, these are just terrorists. We can torture them under CIA black sites, and that will get around these constitutional limitations, which is an implicit way of saying, hey, the Constitution prohibits this garbage, by the way. And this is just what we put up with from our modern deep state, from our modern CIA. No heads essentially rolled over this. There are a few court decisions in federal courts that, reversed kind of the Bush era strategy for these torture techniques, but at the same time, no one had to pay the price. These were vile crimes that none of us would get away with, but somehow our government gets away with because there's a double standard for government.
And just think of what's been destroyed.
Right.
What we could have learned.
Exactly. We only know a small fraction of what was done. So is it a case of just they're not elected, they're put into power, presidents come and go, and over the course of their career, 20 years plus, they just have so much power and so much ability to get things done that they just bypass the law?
I think that's the whole story right there in a nutshell. When I was there, I remember being shocked by some of the old timers who had been there for as long as 40 or 42 years. There was one in particular, he was the National Intelligence Officer for Warning. So he was the one that was supposed to say, I'm worried about what Libya is going to look like 10 years from now. And then somebody writes a paper about it. He had been there for 42 years. He had to get a waiver from the director because he had aged out. Well, these guys make no secret of their belief that they can outweight pretty much any president. Presidents come and go, and these guys are there forever. And so if the president wants them to do something that they don't want to do, they just slow roll it. Just wait until he leaves.
Yeah, doesn't that say something about the deep state in general, how much continuity there is in these bureaucrats and the power they wield and the ideas that they hold, that they can just wait for a president that is a little more amenable to what they want to do to get in power to actually unleash these crimes? If it's more controversial relative to one president than to another, no matter, we can just outlast that president. But it's also too bad that most presidents have been complicit with this nonsense. Certainly Bush and Obama were. And, you see this rhetoric of applying those same standards that they said, would just apply to terrorists, but applied inward to the United States, where, hey, if you're a dissident, you're a terrorist. The war on terror has been focused inward, and it's been focused inward on a lot of the right. They were insurrectionists on January 6th, they told us, right? And, we had to do something for it. We had to throw the book at those people. More, jail time toward those people than the criminals that killed, 5 million people overseas in the federal government under the war on terror in general. That's what we get. We get inward-facing governmental coercion on these things that we're told at first will protect us. No, they will not protect us. They will be a sword against our throat in the future for future presidents.
And that's the end of it. That's why I say, I've said this in interviews a lot. There is a deep state. You don't have to call it the deep state if you don't want to. You can call it the state. You can call it the federal bureaucracy. You can call it whatever you want. The fact is, it exists. And it's unelected. And it's generally unaccountable to anybody. And they just wait for the president to leave if they don't want to do what he wants.
Ugh. So you find out about this torture program. You won't participate. So that puts you on the outs. And when do you know that this is going to be like a significant problem in your career?
Honestly, I didn't know until well after I left the agency. Once I turned this down, and I got this out of cycle promotion for the Abu Zubaydah operation, I was named executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. And in that position, you have access to literally everything that the CIA is doing around the world. And so I'm reading these cables coming back from the secret site, and people are saying, like, whoa, I didn't sign up for this. Nobody said we're going to torture people. I quit. And then they come home. Or there was a secretary who fainted once when she happened to be in the room while Abu Zubaydah was being tortured, and she curtailed her assignment. That means she sends a cable to headquarters saying, I'm coming home. I'm not doing this anymore. That is a career-ending decision to curtail an assignment. And I remember thinking, so I'm not the only one who thinks this is illegal. Certainly somebody's going to come out and say something. And nobody did.
Like, what are the techniques that they were using that were like causing her to faint?
The big ones were waterboarding, the cold cell, and sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation doesn't sound like any big deal. And when that finally leaked, Don Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, made a statement that still kind of sticks in my mind. He said, there is no such thing as sleep deprivation. He said, I have a stand-up desk in my office. I don't even have a chair in my office. And sometimes I'll work 24 hours and then into the next day, 36 hours. But that's not what we're talking about here. We know.
Yeah, that's not what we're talking about. He can eat his Cheetos, eat whatever food he wants, leaves and go as he chooses. There's literally no comparison to being held under sleep deprivation, under a CIA interrogation at a black site. And a black site means, one of the sites in Syria and Egypt. I think the Bush administration even at one point had to acknowledge their existence once information of this leaked out, that they were taking, high-prize terrorist interrogation targets to these sites to do this. And these aren't the only few techniques, as we'll talk about in a second, but it's totally vile that this was said by a Secretary of Defense when the Constitution that they're claiming to be champions of, hey, we believe in the Constitution and limited government, we're the conservative majority now, when the neocons were in power. Well, guess what? That prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. That's exactly what the CIA did. Something we couldn't do. There's no way American citizens could delegate that power to our government, because we ourselves don't hold that power, thankfully so, because we know it's morally wrong. When the government does it, I hate to say, well, I love to say actually, it's also morally wrong.
I know from the American Psychological Association that people begin to lose their minds at day 7 with no sleep, and they begin to die. Their organs begin to shut down at day 9. but the CIA was authorized to keep people awake for 12 days. And that was another thing that caused prisoners to just die. They would have heart failure, you know?
How'd they keep them awake?
You chain them to that eye bolt in the ceiling again. You have these industrial strength lights on them 24 hours a day and like death metal 24 hours on volume 11. And they just can't sleep because if they collapse, they'll pull their arms out of their sockets. They're chained to that eye bolt.
Jeez.
It was bad. And then when people would die, they would just dig a hole next to the interrogation building, put them in the hole, cover it up, and then bring the next guy in.
No questions asked. Do you think that got a lot of mainstream news coverage? Not exactly, even when, a lot of the mainstream news was supposed to be against the Bush administration. Never was against the war on terror, never was really against the war in Iraq. Cheer led for that, including Judith Miller at the New York Times. This stuff was just buried under a rug where it sat, and it never came back to haunt these people and perpetrators involved. No crime, going down for no crimes, no heads rolled over this stuff. It's just so putrid and such a vile part of the American deep state that it's impossible to avoid if you dig into this stuff. It will leave you jaded about the American political system in general, knowing how much, our political overseers tout how great the United States is, and our government, how it's so different and, more valuable and more, just than any other government in the world, yet it does these sorts of things.
No report, no nothing.
Nothing. There was one guy they reported on, and headquarters wrote back and said, just put him on ice until we can figure out what to do. And they literally just put him in a bathtub and filled it with ice, and then just decided a couple days later he started to turn. We should probably bury this guy.
Wow.
Yeah, it was ugly. And the Justice Department never said anything about that. They're like, oh, listen, you can do these techniques, and if you kill him, just bury him out back. Yeah, that wasn't the approved operation.
Was any of it effective? Like, was there any actionable information?
That's the worst part of this. No, none of it was effective.
Yeah, man, this is just gruesome and vile. It is some of the worst things that the government has engaged in during my lifetime. I'm so glad to hear John Kiriakou, of all people, talk about it. He's a literal hero for exposing this stuff from inside the CIA, at great risk to himself, by the way, so protect him at all costs. But he also needs a pardon. He needs a pardon for the same reason that Julian Assange and Edward Snowden do, for unmasking the evils of the state that play out. And when you do that, when you're transparent with the public about crimes that have been committed, that is no crime whatsoever. He deserves medals and immediate pardon right now. Do I think that's going to happen? No, I don't think that's going to happen, because a lot of those tools on the war on terror is something that governments, regardless of who the president is at the time, cling to for their own protections and to sell as protecting the American public. But just look at this. This is just vile. Andrew Napolitano had an article last year about how during the trial of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, which is still going on, he was one of the architects of 9/11, probably the primary architect of 9/11, essentially, within Al-Qaeda. They're talking about the witnesses they have for the government, and the government's trying to claim that a lot of the terrorist revelations that were given were done voluntarily, despite, acknowledging a lot of this torture that happened. And just things that happened at these CIA black sites were just so horrific. Some of these people were raped in ways that I won't even describe on this video. This is in addition to the waterboarding and cold cell and sleep deprivation. And Andrew Napolitano is talking about how the government can't even maintain its case when they have some witnesses, like, basically telling the truth, letting the mask slip a little bit about what actually happened, including one that, was on record saying that he would slit the throat of the son of one of these terrorists they were torturing. It's just so horrific. I mean, I think what he says here is just so clairvoyant and so true. The Bush-Cheney torture regime and its Devil's Island at Gitmo are among the darkest events perpetrated by a modern American presidency. So true. But that's not it. I mean, in 2014, we actually got a Senate Intelligence Committee report about torture that was perpetrated by the Bush administration. This is the Washington Post. It's essentially a neocon rag. But even it built this site to show how horrific and atrocious and heinous these crimes were. And you can just click on these individual things that they put in the document and how it's clarified. Number one, it wasn't even an effective means of acquiring intelligence. That was borne out in this document by the Senate, by the way. It rested on inaccurate claims of their effectiveness. Like, they had drummed up this, campaign to claim that this was effective techniques to extract real information, but it really wasn't. It was brutal and far worse than the CIA represented, especially in public. You can read about that too. It impeded White House oversight, as if the White House really wanted oversight over this, by the way. Bush totally was complicit, but that's what they claim in this report. Deeply flawed throughout the program's duration. All these things, just spell disaster. These would not be appropriate defenses if we were caught in these acts. If we tortured another person by sleep deprivation or raped them or, cold cell or waterboarding, we'd be put behind bars for a long time. Doesn't happen when it comes to the government. They get out of this scot-free. But like I said, John Kiriakou, just a chilling podcast in general with Joe Rogan. Really awesome podcast in general to listen to if you listen to the entire thing. I highly recommend it. The original link is in the description. And I think he's just a hero in my mind. I will listen to anything that man says. The man's honest. He said things that were at great risk to his own reputation and life, spending, years in jail for this, I believe. And that's just the truth. CIA torture is a real thing. It's a real thing to grapple with, and it's just another reason why the CIA must be abolished. You can't reform that monster. You can't put John Ratcliffe at the head of the CIA and just say, oh, hey, everything's good now, everything's reformed. You can't name Tulsi Gabbard the director of national intelligence and be like, all right, well, the CIA's turned a new page in its history, and now it's a good force for protecting Americans. It's not. Regardless of what you think of Tulsi Gabbard or John Ratcliffe, the latter is especially vile. He was, the architect of expanding FISA 702 while in Congress, by the way. You can read up on that if you want. But I'm glad for this podcast. Thank you for shedding light on this, John. Thanks, Rogan, for having him on. What do you think about this? What does this say about the CIA? Does it just need to be abolished? Do heads need to roll? Will this behavior continue if heads don't roll? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Joe Rogan. Thanks, Joe, for this interview. And if you like my video and my commentary, please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support my channel. I will graciously appreciate that if you do. And in return for that deed, I will give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.